Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. As promised in my previous video, in this video I'm going to give you a first-hand account of the magical working that I engaged in to attain knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, what that was like and what the result is. So depending on the length of this video, it could go over 2 videos. Whether it's 1 or 2, I'm giving you that first-hand account. Let's get straight to it. I began my working in 2013, April 2013 to be exact. And in my previous videos, which I'll link in the description below, I talk about how there's really 3 main methods for attaining knowledge and conversation. There's the Book of Abramelin, Liber Samekh, and Liber 8. And I sort of took inspiration from all 3 when I was developing the working that I was going to undertake to contact my own angel. So what I ended up doing is, in terms of the actual invocation and the ritual that I used, I went with Samekh. But in terms of the duration of time, I was guided by the Mather's version of the Book of Abramelin, so I allocated a period of 6 months to complete the working, and I decided that the Samekh ritual was something that I was going to repeat 262 times. And the reason for that number is because when you add up the number of repetitions of the prayer in Liber 8, it adds up to 260. I just added an extra 2 so that the numbers numerologically would reduce to 10, which is a number of completion. So that is the working that I synthesized that I was going to use to contact my Holy Guardian Angel. In terms of why I decided to undertake this working, well, I just felt guided to do it. I was engaged in some other magical work at the time, and there were some synchronicities that were occurring in my life, and they were all guiding me towards then being the right time to attempt this working. As I said, I decided to start the working at the end of April. As it happened, I happened to be house sitting at the time, so I had a house to myself to begin the working. So it was an ideal environment, and I got to work. And at first I was doing 1 invocation per day, and then towards the end of the working I was doing more than 1 a day. And also, after a few weeks of doing the invocations physically, I began to do them a lot more astrally. So I would project myself astrally into the room I was using as a temple, and I would conduct the ritual that way. But I was consistently every day, at least once a day, doing Samekh. It would take me about an hour to complete, and I didn't break that discipline for the whole 6 months. There were times when I was tempted to do so. There was one particular day where I was exhausted from the events of the day, and I collapsed on my bed and actually fell asleep. But I was able to luckily rouse myself from my sleep, go back into the room that I was using as my temple at the time, and complete Samekh before I went to bed, thus not breaking the routine. And so from that experience I learnt the level of willpower and discipline that I needed to keep this working going. And that was something that developed further as the working went on. And fortunately I was able to maintain that discipline until the very end of the 6-month period. So that was the practical aspects of undergoing my Samekh working. What were some of the results of this? Well, I'll start with some of the more superficial results, secondary results, earlier results of the working leading up to the final attainment. So one thing that happened was there were phenomena that occurred whilst I was repeating the invocation, in certain performances of Samekh. I'd learnt Samekh off by heart, including the intonation of the Greek words before I engaged in this working, and I do it every day, and sometimes it was just a quiet, peaceful environment that would result, but other times there were phenomena. One such phenomena, which I noticed happened a few times after I had completed the invocation, every part of it, was there was a kind of an astral mist that would appear in the ritual chamber. This is something that I physically saw. It was like a glowing kind of a mist that was floating around everywhere. I don't really know how else to describe it, but it was definitely there. Another thing that occurred after one performance of Samekh was, and this was when I just started the working, when I was house sitting for this friend, I went outside after performing the ritual. And this particular friend lived across the road from a Masonic hall. And I went outside and I was gazing across the road at the Masonic hall. It was a perfectly cloudless day, and yet I saw lightning in the sky. Not like a lightning bolt, but like the dissipated flash that you see when there's lightning high up in the clouds. I kept seeing this flash in the sky. And so that was another phenomenon that resulted from the change in perception, the dramatic change in perception that I was able to effect by doing the Samekh working. There were a lot of coincidences, synchronicities that started to happen as I was doing the Samekh working. In particular, I started to see a lot of different symbols repeatedly. One symbol that I saw time and time again was the Ankh. Another was the shoe symbol. I saw owls a lot. I also saw the eye and the triangle a lot. The number 33 kept popping up. Solar symbols kept popping up. And the concept of divine love kept popping up. And one symbol that kept showing itself very prolifically as I was engaging in the Samekh working was the flower of life. And this symbol, more than any other, became the indicator that the presence of the angel was very close. It was almost like the angel's calling card. Whenever I was stumbling across information or stumbling across a situation where the flower of life was present, I knew that I was being guided to that information or that situation for a reason. Another phenomenon that I experienced was a peculiar physiological phenomenon. One night I had a sore arm as I was conducting the Samekh working. And then after having conducted the working, I went to bed. And as I was falling asleep, I went into a kind of a trance state, and I felt the pain in my arm move up my body into my head and then out of the top of my head, and the pain was gone. So it was like a healing experience brought on by contact with the angel. And in fact, unusually, for the whole Samekh period, I didn't get sick once. Even though there were plenty of seasonal flus and colds going around, I seemed somehow protected from that by the working that I was undertaking, by the presence of the angel that I was invoking. Another thing that I experienced a lot of was visions, but particularly strong visions. So one such vision, if you can call it that, or maybe an experience, quite far into the 6-month period, I was engaged in the meditation stage of Samekh that I would do each day. I'd do my intoning of the names at each of the 4 corners. I would call upon the angel in spirit active, and then call upon the angel in spirit passive, and then thereafter would meditate. And I got lots of different interesting visuals and interesting information in the meditation phase when I was purely receptive to the angelic energy that I just called in. And sometimes I got full-blown spiritual experiences. The first time it happened, I was laying there. There was a bit of chatter going through my mind as I was trying to meditate, and then suddenly everything just went blank. I completely lost consciousness of everything. It was almost like a samadhi experience. And then I came to again. It was like a dreamless sleep. I know that I've used that description before for very high levels of spiritual attainment. This was another type of experience along those lines. Another experience or vision that came out of the Samekh working that I will never forget is one night, again, I was in the meditation stage of the practice, and suddenly I lost awareness of my body, I lost awareness of my personality, and I was physically in space. Like, I was just a point of consciousness, a point of awareness, and all around me, suddenly, it was like as though I'd been physically transported there. I was in the void of space. I could see the stars all around. And my immediate reaction to this was to freak out. My awareness didn't know what was happening and just started to panic. That's the only word I can use to describe it. It was a state of panic. And because it was such a shock to be suddenly transplanted into that situation, the experience only lasted a split second, and then I came back and resumed normal consciousness. But it was as though it was real life. It was actually happening. I was actually suddenly in space. So that was very strange. There are a number of communications that I received from the angel. So at various points when I was particularly in the meditative phase of the work, I would get thoughts pop into my head that were not really my own thoughts, and then I would write those down. So the angel was communicating certain information to me that was important. And some of the content of those spiritual communications is actually very profound. And one day I'm going to share those with everyone, but I was instructed by the angel that, in fact, I had to keep those revelations hidden for a time, keep that information hidden for a time before I finally revealed it to people. And in fact, I disobeyed the angel. It didn't end well for me. It created a very calamitous situation, so I learnt my lesson. I will reveal that information when the time is right. The other important thing that happened as a result of doing the daily performances of Samekh was that I started to notice a shift in my consciousness. There are a few stages that I went through in this shift. It wasn't like a single change. It was like stripping away layer after layer of consciousness, of levels of my experience of reality as my mind processed it to get to something at the core. So when I first started doing Samekh, in the meditative phase of the work, a lot of it was just processing stuff that was going through my head, the usual psychological stuff, that you go to therapy to kind of process. Similar to that. And then once my mind had gone through the process of digesting all of that and kind of getting rid of all of that, I began to mine deeper into what was in my unconscious. The angel was pulling me deeper and deeper and revealing each successive layer of my mind to me and each successive layer of my being to me. So the next thing that I started to experience was experiences of what you might call true will. I started to understand what I was really meant to do, what I'm like as a person, all of that sort of thing. But also deeper truths about reality in general started to come through a lot more strongly. So, but mainly the way that my experience was changing was I was learning what I needed to learn to be my best self. The other thing that I was starting to notice as I was engaging in this work was that my perspective was starting to shift. As I was getting deeper and deeper into what I truly was, I was touching something which was truly profound. It was a pure awareness which was unconditioned. It didn't determine whether it was in pain or feeling pleasure based on any external stimulus. It simply was, and it was content. It was like a perfect blissful state, and it was a state of pure being. And I was beginning to touch this as the working to attain knowledge and conversation progressed, and it reached its absolute pinnacle when I finally finished the working, and I began to see how at the core of what I truly was divinity. And this is what the angel was really trying to show me, and this is what the angel was appearing as. But of course, as I moved closer to the angel, I realized that was really the part of myself that was divine, which I was supposed to identify with. And the goal, of course, was as those parts of me, where I put my awareness, moved closer to what I actually was, eventually the two would fuse, and that is what the experience of knowledge and conversation would be. So I was having all of these experiences, which were brought on by the repeated invocation of Liber Samekh, and I was moving towards the end of the 6-month period, the 262 performances of this ritual. And at the end, I went through 3 days that were packed full of really intense spiritual experiences, which culminated in knowledge and conversation. And I will describe that in a subsequent video, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed my personal account of what it's like to engage in the working to attain knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, and some of the effects that you can start to expect in your own life as you do this, before the ultimate result is realized. So if you have enjoyed that, please like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to support my work. Leave comments down below if you have any. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.